resources to that, and I believe that is starting now. At the same time, I have said to President Karzai that after October, I think it's important that the House knows that, after October, we are prepared to do more work mentoring and training the Afghan security services, and that is something that we will consider as we make our decisions about what we do after October.
David Cameron. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, the most recent focus on building up the Afghan army, on the coordination between Afghanistan and Pakistan is right. But I think it would actually help to acknowledge that some of the early objectives were slightly lofty, were slightly vague, and the coordination wasn't there. I think we will take people with us for the future if actually we admit to some of the things that were got wrong in the past. Let me ask some very specific questions about helicopters and Afghanistan. Isn't the basic problem this? The number of helicopters we have in Afghanistan is simply insufficient. Will the Prime Minister confirm that the American Marines, who have approximately the same number of troops as us in Helmand, are supported by some 100 helicopters, whereas our troops are supported by fewer than 30? That is the case, isn't it?
Mr. Speaker, he is right to raise issues of equipment so that I can assure him that we are doing everything that we can. I have to say that the Lieutenant Colonel Nick Richardson, who's on the ground in Afghanistan, and said there's much speculation about helicopters and have we got enough. It's a sad fact that helicopters would not have saved the lives of the individuals last week. The commander on the ground, he said, has sufficient to get on with the task with which he's been given. And why? Because we've increased the number of helicopters by 60% over the last 2 years. We've increased the capability of helicopters by 84%. I visited RAF Benson on Monday to see the Merlin helicopters that will be deployed in the field by the end of the year, with training of the crew being done immediately in America. And look, as they move from Iraq to Afghanistan, I've got to explain, they're dealing with different terrain. They have got to be re-equipped for the functions in Afghanistan. They're dealing with heights and they're dealing with a different problem of temperatures and weather, and the helicopters are being refitted for that purpose, and the crew are having to be trained in different environments to be ready for Afghanistan. We have also a helicopter budget that is going to be $6 billion over the next 10 years to improve our helicopters in the future. We are working with NATO, who are providing through contracts helicopters for the transit of equipment. And at the same time, we've created a helicopter fund that was our initiative, and others of our allies are now contributing, I think, over the next period, 11 helicopters to the Allied effort in Afghanistan. So we have done everything that we can to increase the number of helicopters, and there will be more Merlin helicopters on the ground. And I do ask the Conservative Party to look at the statements that are being made by those people who speak for our armed forces on the ground. They have made it absolutely clear that in this particular instance, while the loss of life is tragic and sad, it is not to do with helicopters.
David Cameron. Thank you. We have to be frank about the difficulties and dangers in Afghanistan, and one of the difficulties is a shortage of helicopters. Let me take each of the Prime Minister's arguments in turn. He talks about the 60% increase in the number of helicopters. That is compared with 3 years ago when we had half as many troops. So there hasn't been a proportional increase in helicopters. Even if you look at the 84% in capability, that is about helicopter hours. Clearly, one helicopter can only be in one place at one time. If you want to move more troops around the battlefield more quickly, you need more helicopters. Let's take the argument about Nick Richardson. Of course, I listen with respect to the official spokesman of the army, but I think the Prime Minister should also listen to someone like Stuart Tootle, who commanded 3 Para, and who said, for instance, in Afghanistan in 2006, repeated demands for more helicopters fell on deaf ears. He should also listen to Lord Guthrie, I don't know why Labour MPs don't want to listen to the former Chief of the Defence Staff. He said this: of course they need more helicopters. If there had been more, it is likely fewer soldiers would have been killed by roadside bombs. These are important points, and we should listen to them. Now, let me ask the Prime Minister this. Isn't the reason we don't have enough helicopters is we didn't plan to have enough? And when he looks back to 2004 and his decision to reduce the helicopter budget by 1.4 billion, does he remember that the National Audit Office said that year there was a considerable deficit in the availability of helicopter lift? Does he now recognise that decision was a bad mistake?
First of all, the number of troops in Afghanistan has gone up from just over 7,000 to 9,000 over the last 2 years. The number of helicopters has gone up 60%. Now, that is a higher percentage rise. Secondly, I talked to Tim Radford. Well, 7,000 to 9,000 and 60% increase in helicopters. The second thing, I do hope we can conduct this debate, because our troops will be looking at this debate as well and looking at what we say. I've talked to Tim Radford, the brigadier on the ground, and he assures me that his troops have the equipment that they need. What we want on the ground is additional Afghan national forces, and that is what I've been talking to President Karzai about. As far as the spending programme on defence is concerned, we have the longest sustainable increase in defence spending for any period of over 20 years. And the reason is, in addition to the defence budget, £14 billion has been spent on Iraq and Afghanistan, and £4 billion of that has been spent on urgent operational requirements for the troops. Now, part of the spending is on helicopters, and we have now committed £6 billion over the next 10 years for helicopter spending. And I just have to say to him, more Merlins will arrive in the field later this year, and that is what we have already announced. The helicopter fund is producing helicopters from allies as well. We have an order for more helicopters for the future, so the helicopter equipment programme continues, and we work with our allies to deliver the best services on the ground. I think we should look at this particular operation, Operation Panther's Claw, and be absolutely clear: it is not an absence of helicopters that has cost the loss of lives. We are dealing with IEDs, we're dealing with devices on the ground, bombs that are against, and we have brought in since April more engineers to be able to deal with that problem. And at the same time, I want to say also that Operation Panther's Claw is making progress, despite the implication of some of these comments, and is making progress and gaining ground, and that is also an important aspect of this operation. And I hope we could have a cross-party consensus on what we are doing to help our armed forces.